There we go. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nathan Clements Gillespie. I'm the Artistic Director of Frieze Masters. And thank you very much for joining us for this conversation between Gerlinde Gruber and Jennifer Higgie. It is my pleasure now to introduce you to Jasper Sharp, Curator at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, who will be leading the conversation today. Jasper, over to you. And again, thank you all, Jasper, Jennifer, and Gerlinde, for being with us today. And thank you to everyone who has logged in to hear this conversation. Jasper.
Thank you, Nathan. A very good evening from the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. It's a very quiet museum at the moment. We've been closed since the beginning of this month. But just for this evening, we have opened the museum for all of you watching and listening at home for a very special evening dedicated to a very special artist. A few technical notes before we begin. All of you listening to the talk this evening will be muted. Please feel free to send in any questions that you might have using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and Jen and Gerlinde will try to answer them at the end of the conversation. Please note that the talk is being recorded and an edited version will be available afterwards, both on the Frieze and Kunsthistorisches Museum channels. If for any reason we get interrupted, please just refresh the URL and try to log in again. If this fails and there's a bigger issue, we'll send you a new joining link via email, so just check your inboxes. And finally, if you experience any technical issues during the talk, please email events@frieze.com and the team there will do their best to help you. Thank you. Now, the Kunsthistorisches Museum has plenty of women in its collection, but they are almost all goddesses, nymphs, queens, and empresses depicted by male artists over the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. It's a simple fact that we have extremely few female artists in the collection. And sadly, this will not change anytime soon because we are by and large a non-collecting institution today. The museum remains, in a sense, a private collection, reflecting the personal tastes of successive generations of Habsburg rulers. But in recent years, it has become a priority within the museum to exhibit those few objects that we do have that were made by women artists. And some of them, like Sophonisba Anguissola or Vigée Lebrun, have begun to receive more attention during this time. Others, however, continue to remain somewhat in the shadows. And it's one of these artists that we're going to be looking at this evening, the Baroque painter Michaelina Woutier. To discuss her work, we're joined this evening by two wonderful scholars and writers, my colleague Gerlinde Gruber, curator of Flemish painting here at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, and Jennifer Higgie, editor-at-large of Frieze magazine and host of the Bow Down podcast series, which examines the place of women in the history of art. Gerlinde and Jennifer will talk for around 30 minutes or so, and then there'll be a chance for you all to ask your questions. You can send them anytime during the talk and we'll make a note of them. Should you have to leave us early, as I say, you can watch the talk back on the Frieze and Kunsthistorisches channels. I wish you all a very nice evening and we'll now hand over to you, Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, Jasper and Nathan. And thank you so much to the Kunsthistorisches Museum and also, of course, to Frieze Masters. It's a great honor to be here and to talk with Dr. Gruber. So hello, Gerlinde. So, of course, we're talking about the great Michaelina Woutier today, and she was born in 1604, and we've just seen her self-portrait from 1649, which greeted you as you joined the talk. But Gerlinde, who was Michaelina Woutier?
She definitely was a very interesting woman, probably in the catalogue of the exhibition, which was done dedicated to her in 2018, she is described as a rule breaker, and I think that definitely she was. She was born, as you said, 1604. She's Baptist actually as Maria Magdalena Woutier, or Woutier, depending if you pronounce it in the French or the Dutch way. And to a rather wealthy family. Her father was a merchant, but had also had his period of a page working for the Spanish court in Naples, probably. And she is the second daughter in his second marriage, and otherwise there are only brothers, which is an interesting constellation. The family is very much linked to the courts in Brussels and Spain. Two of the brothers will be nobilitated during her lifetime, and she has really a wonderful network with her family. She is born in Mons. I didn't mention Mons is a city in the south of Brussels, in the Walloon part of Belgium. And she moves to Brussels probably only after the death of her mother, which is in 1638. So we do have some facts about her life, but not that much about her as an artist. So she still is rather enigmatic for us.
I mean, this is the really fascinating thing. And by the way, I'd like to point out that you are, of course, standing in front of her great masterpiece, the Bacchanal, which we'll get on to in a little while, in situ in the Kunsthistorisches Museum. In the 17th century, of course, we do know of quite a few women who were artists, especially in Italy and of course some in Holland as well. But many of those artists, women artists, tended to be the daughters of painters, which is why they managed to get access to a studio. But that wasn't the case with Michaelina. So what kind of access would she have had to any kind of training as an artist?
Yeah, that's the strange fact, and probably also the reason why she was forgotten so immediately after her death, probably already. We know that one of her younger brothers, Charles Woutier, was a painter. He is 5 years younger than Michaelina. So through her brother, she had a link, but she's older than he, and we don't really know with whom she trained. We don't even know with whom the brother trained, because the brother tried to be outside of the official painter system in Belgium that was very well organized through guilds. He inscribed in the guild in Brussels only in 1651, which is really late. And this is one of the reasons why we don't know that much about her. The very first dated painting of hers is known only through a print, but a print which also bears her name, which is why she became known first to insiders, to people who love prints, graphic art. And that is already a portrait of a nobleman, an Italian, very important general who worked for the Spanish king.
And so she was obviously quite successful during her lifetime, in the sense that she was getting commissions to paint portraits of the nobility. And of course, as we'll talk in a bit, she, created extraordinary and large history painting, which was quite unusual for women at the time, who were in the main banned from the life room, and so they didn't get the access to the kind of training, as they weren't allowed to paint from the naked models. So what do we know of what kind of commissions or support she had professionally during her lifetime, in the sense of where did her paintings go? Where did they end up?
We know the most important collector we know during her lifetime are, of course, the Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, who was the first owner of this enormous canvas behind me. And other courtiers of the Brussels court. So I think through the links of her family, she got a really good network and became famous, not only as a portraitist, but also as a very versatile painter, doing, as you said, also history paintings, flower paintings, genre paintings. So she was really very broad and had treated different subjects. And yeah, Archduke Leopold Wilhelm plays a special role also in her discovery, because through his very well done inventory, which was done in 1659. It was done by a Flemish painter who probably knew the artists, the contemporary artists in the collection. So he described the author of the big painting behind me as N. Woutier, which might be a misspelling of M for Michaelina, we don't know. But Leopold Wilhelm owned 3 other paintings of her where she signed in the back, and where in the inventory her name is correctly given as Michel, which means, or Micheline, the French version of Michaelina, which seems to be a chosen name for her. A sort of artist name she chose to sign her paintings, because in the document she also signs as Maddalena, so Magdalene Woutier. So a very complicated, very confusing story of names she's using.
Right.
And what is also important to know is that she was successful as a painter, but she was also very successful in dealing with, she owned a lot of properties together with her brother Charles, with whom she lived in Brussels. So they were not they were very independent financially. And I think that is one of the reasons why they could be a little bit out of the rules, out of the guild in any way.
Yeah. And of course, she didn't marry and she didn't have children. And often the story was that when, very promising or accomplished women artists married and had children, then they often tended to disappear because they were subsumed into their domestic roles. So she was a remarkably independent woman by all accounts. And do we know of any other women artists who would have been working around the same time as her? Do we know of any who she might have known?
Interestingly enough, there is another female artist in Mons. So really the place where she lived, where she started. And this artist, who today is completely unknown, Anna Francesca de Bruyn, she is born nearly at the same age as Michaelina in 1604 or 5. And she has in 1631 already the possibility to paint a work for the high altar of a church which was not that far to Michaelina's home. So she probably knew this painter, and that must have given her courage to choose that way. And I think the situation of Anna Francesca de Bruyn was a little bit easier because her uncle was an architect and painter, so she did have some artistic links in the family, whereas Michaelina's, beside of, her brother at that time was still very young, did not.
Yeah, and I know there's very little, written about her at the time. So, a lot of this is speculation. But in terms of her painterly language, who do you think her main influences were? For example, Rubens is obviously the great Flemish painter at this point. Do you think he was influenced by him? He was a bit older than her.
Well, Rubens died in 1640, right? So he did visit Mons when she was still there in the 30s, in the entourage of Maria de Medici, who exiled. It was a very fascinating period to live in Flanders then. So of course she knew Rubens, but when she started to work, which was at the beginning of the 40s, I think she really tried to go a different way. If you look at her paintings, they are more influenced by Italian, French painters, or Flemish painters, but Flemish painters who looked more to Caravaggio, or Flemish painters who had a more classic style. So her style is very different to Rubens. And when we decided to hang this painting in the Rubens galleries, because the rest of the room is really all about Rubens, we were a little bit afraid if she could make it, if she could stand the power of expression and color Rubens paintings have. But I think she is really doing a great job. I mean, you see it.
Yeah.
It's very convincing.
Okay, it might be a good moment actually to zoom in on this picture. Camille, would you be able to put the painting up so everyone can see it more closely? That would be great, thank you.
Yeah, you see here that this painting is a mythological painting. You see a rather drunken Bacchus in the middle of it, reclining, naked, which is very interesting because in this painting, the men are mostly naked, and that creates a problem for women because they were not allowed to study the nude male. They were not allowed to enter academies where that was taught. But of course, living with 8 brothers, she probably knew.
She knew the male form.
She definitely knew. Although she never married, she definitely knew. But it's interesting how she here is looking at Giuseppe Ribera. She brings some influence of Rubens, of course, a little bit less, but also Champagne, Philippe de Champagne. There is a lot of different Flemish painters from her contemporary, like Janssen or Van Oost, and all these painters, when she died and when her name was forgotten, received paintings which were done by her and then attributed to these paintings.
Right.
But what she did now with this big Bacchus is very interesting because you see at the right side this woman dressed with this rose. It's a sort of chiton.
Yeah.
That very probably is a self-portrait of herself.
Could we zoom in on that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, that's her. Yeah, in front of this wonderful, great-looking goat and the children. You see her, and it's interesting. I mean, in the entourage of Bacchus, everybody is supposed to be drunken, to be very fancy, to behave in a strange way, and she's very cool. She's the only one looking outside of the painting, and showing her breast. It's a mixture between an Amazon. There are some very interesting antique sculpture influencing this position, and a Menad, who are women forgetting how to behave in the influence of Bacchus.
Yeah, so I mean, do you think that this painting, in a way, could be an act of defiance for her? You know, she's a woman painter at a time when women aren't encouraged to paint. Women aren't allowed into the life room, yet she's painted a whole group of semi-naked men, and she's also painted herself semi-naked, which is also an extraordinarily radical thing to do at the time, because, of course, virginity and propriety would have been the main way that a woman should recommend herself at the time.
Yeah, no, it's really very, there is a lot of courage behind. She must have been very proud and very self-confident. I mean, from the technical point of view, it's really very well painted. She is really convincing. There are wonderful colors. You see French influence in it. You see Italian influence in it. But she must have been very self-confident to do a painting like this. The story of the painting is very interesting because although it was mentioned in the inventory, the name got immediately lost after the death of the Archduke. So when it reappeared in another inventory, because it was transferred from Vienna to the Baroque court, it was given to a Cornelis Woutier, and then afterwards even Woutier was forgotten. And only in the 19th century, one of my colleagues pointed out that it might be her. Gustav Gluck was a little bit hesitating because he saw the other paintings and he saw somehow the link. But for him, it was impossible that a woman would be able to paint such a big painting. The scale was really there was no question that a woman would be able to do that. And only in 1967, Günther Heinz said, it's so obvious that this is the same style, it must be hers. And we did a restoration in 2016, I think it was. And we discovered that the painting originally was even larger than it is now. I mean, you see that the little boy on the right, in the right corner, that his arm is not completely visible. You see, if you see the painting unframed, it becomes very clear that it was bigger because the painted area goes alongside the stretcher. So this must have been really quite extraordinary and outstanding, and for a female painter, something really very special.
So maybe we can go back to the regular screen now, Camille. Thank you. So what do you think accounts for the fact that she was obviously very successful during her lifetime? You know, she was making these extraordinary pictures. Why did she disappear after she died? What happened?
Yeah, well, one of the theories is, and I think that's very plausible, is that she and her brother were both rather wealthy, and probably they did not sell that many paintings, but the paintings remained in the family, in their property, and stayed there and was sold in a way that the authorship was just forgotten. I mean, we also lost traces of her brother, although he was, after 1651 in the guild, he was also a very independent character. He did portraits of Archduke Leopold Wilhelm II, and was also forgotten. So I think that might be one of the reasons.
And she lived to quite a great age, didn't she, till her 80s? But as far as I know, she stopped painting in her late 50s. Is that right?
Yeah, at least we don't have signed and dated paintings from later on. We know that she still bought properties, but there are no traces of paintings anymore.
So it's possible that there are a lot of paintings by her out there which are misattributed.
I do think so, yes. I'm really convinced that they will pop up.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, there's a job for detective. Yeah.
Well, already during when it became known that there will be an exhibition dedicated to her, some new paintings were discovered.
Because that was the major. That was
really first amazing.
Oh, I'm sorry, we broke up then. So that was the first major exhibition of her work a couple of years ago in
2018. Yes.
Yeah. And how was that received, that exhibition?
Oh, very, very positively.
Yeah.
It was a small exhibition, only about 40 paintings from her and painters influencing her. No, it was really an eye-opener.
Wow, fantastic. And so where can we see her paintings now? Where are they on display?
Well, the largest one you see here,
yes,
in our museum. There are others in the Antwerp Museum. There is a church in Mons where there is still an altarpiece she did. So there are some places, there are a lot of paintings in private collections still.
Right.
On the market, so I do think that this will still change a bit. There are some in Antwerp, in some collections, so come to Vienna.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is really one of the most important paintings.
Absolutely. And speaking of women artists in the Kunsthistorisches Museum collection, who else have you got in there in terms of historic women artists?
Well, we do have a very famous self-portrait of Sophonisba. Oh, that's another thing. Speaking about the self-portrait of Sophonisba, strangely enough, she did a self-portrait. Michaelina did a self-portrait, but the self-portrait was never printed. And you become known only through printed versions. Prints have a much larger audience, right? So I think this is one of the reasons where she was not, probably she was not that keen to be memorized, or she didn't care, I don't know. So back to Sophonisba, we have a very famous small painting of Sophonisba painted herself. We do have some wonderful flower pieces of Rachel Reusch. We have Vichy Lebrun, we have Margarita Caffi. There are different other female flower paintings. We have a wonderful genre painting by Maria van der Oosterwijk. So about 16 paintings by female painters and about 7,000 by male, unfortunately.
Wow. Okay.
And it's not very balanced.
No, and as Jasper explained before, you don't acquire works for the collection now. It's not a collecting institution. So that's it, I guess, in terms of the representation of women. And can I ask you a very broad question? And obviously it's a very complicated answer, but what do you account to the fact that women have, in a sense, been written out of traditional art histories and their work hasn't been included in the canon?
Well, I do think that one of the reasons is that women generally had only, if they wanted to become artists, they needed a father or a brother to be taught painting. And then most of the time they had no possibility to enter the guild. So the system of, the guild was a possibility to create a network. So they were outside of the official male networks. And I think this was one of the reasons. I mean, the few women who really became very famous were partly really seen as a curiosity and had really troubles to be really recognized as the male artist. It was much harder for a woman than for a man. Although in the northern culture of Europe, women were allowed to have properties, so they did have some sort of independency, but with the arts, especially with painting, where you had the possibility to become really famous and to get nobilitated for it. I mean, have a look at Rubens. Women were not that much allowed to. They were not appreciated and definitely not really welcome to do that.
Yeah. I mean, Vasari in his Lives of the Artists famously talks about women artists as marvels, doesn't he? So that, it's hard enough to be an artist, but to be a woman artist in the 17th century or 16th century, she would have had to have been superhuman in terms of what she would have had to have overcome. There's the story too of when the small self-portrait by Sophonisba Anguissola entered the collection of the Kunsthistorisches Museum, and it was placed in the cabinet of curiosities, I think, because it was considered so remarkable. That's
exactly the problem.
Yeah. And how long did she languish in the cabinet of curiosities?
I think that was quite long. Well, when I started, she already, which was in the 80s, she already was in the official galleries. So we did do some progress.
Right. Okay, that's great. Just to finish up, I'm a bit curious about the different spellings of Michaelina Woutier's name. In some museums, she's listed as W-A-U, Woutier, and in others it's Woutier. And how do you account for that? That there isn't even a fixed agreement on how a name should be spelled, it would seem.
Well, in the 17th century, in general, it's really very typical that nobody was so keen to write his name always in the same way.
Right.
There are a lot of examples for that. In her case, there is this complication that she lived in Mons, that means in the French-speaking area of the now Belgium state, in an area where Dutch was also spoken. So you have the two communities and the two pronunciations. So I'm used to talk about her as Michaelina Woutier, the Flemish spelling. And this is one of the reasons why at the end the exhibition dedicated to her was called only Michaelina, because we wanted to avoid all these how to pronounce and So it's really a cultural problem mixed with the fact that in the 17th century there was not such a strict way to deal with names.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess there are a lot of male artists who go by their first names, like Raphael and Rembrandt and Titian. They're all their first names, aren't they? So
yeah.
It's
not bad to be named like that.
Absolutely. Well, look,
and it's the name she chose. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's her name. Yeah. She's like Madonna or something, like a pop star. Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, that's whizzed by, and I've so enjoyed talking to you. But I think we're going to turn over to Jasper Sharp now for some questions that might be coming in. So yeah, really fascinating, Gerlinde, and I can't wait to get to the Kunsthistorisches Museum to come and have a look at the painting in the flesh, because what a remarkable work it is.
It will be a pleasure to look at the painting with you.
And Jen, the nicest thing about not the nicest thing, one of the nicest things about this painting is it has a wonderful bench right in front of it, a sofa.
Right.
You can just fall into this sofa and stare at this painting for hours on end.
Oh, how lovely. Right.
That was wonderful. I was completely fascinated by everything you were saying. We do have a few questions that have come in. Someone is asking, you mentioned, Gerlinde, that the painting was acquired by Leopold Wilhelm. Could you give us a hint how he would have come across this painting, where he might have acquired it from?
Great question.
Is that something we know?
No, we don't know, but there are some hints. It is a very big painting. It's very large in scale, which usually you do if you know to whom you sell it. So it might be a commission by himself. We know that she was known at the court of Leopold Wilhelm. She did work for his dancing master. She worked for the Jesuit Martino Martini, whom Leopold Wilhelm also knew. So there were plenty of possibilities for him to know her. And I mean, he bought not only this painting, but also 3 other smaller ones, the smaller ones show really classical Habsburg saints, male saints. So I think that she did these paintings for him, that they are commissioned.
Somebody's asking if there was a publication made about the 2018 exhibition in Antwerp, and if it gives a sort of as complete an overview as possible of the known paintings.
Absolutely. There was a wonderful catalog made by Katlijne van der Stichelen, who did a lot of archive research. So everything, nearly everything we know about Michaelina, we know because of Katlijne's work. So I think it's still available. It's a very nice book, exhibition catalog.
Okay, great. Someone is asking whether Michaelina features in other paintings, obviously the self-portrait, but other sort of crowd scenes or group paintings in which she inserted herself that we know of?
No, that's the only one. But given the very important Leopold Wilhelm, the commission was important. So she's not the only artist picturing herself in the painting. We have other examples where Leopold Wilhelm bought paintings with the self-portraits in it.
Yeah. Can I jump in with a question quickly, Jasper? Gerlinde, I meant to ask you too. In the scene of the Bacchanale, is it depicting a very specific story in terms of a kind of strict iconography of the day, or is it more a sort of a free-form response to the idea of Bacchus?
Oh, it's very, very, very free. I mean, this Bacchus is not a triumphant one. And I find it a very funny idea. He's completely drunken, and there is this man pressing a grape, so the juice dribbles into his mouth. But I mean, that's not alcohol. So it's funny that Bacchus is getting some fresh juice instead of wine.
Yeah.
No, it's really very fascinating. A very original iconography she's choosing.
Interesting. Right.
Gerlinde, another question for you. I believe I'm correct in thinking that there are around 30 to 35 paintings by Michaelina that are currently attributed to her with some safety, some security.
Yeah.
How many might exist? I mean, I know that's an impossible question, but given how long
that's hard to say.
Given how long she worked and maybe any records or diaries or anything that came down, how many paintings could there be out there by her?
We really don't know, because we don't know how long she was actually active. But there are some mentioned in the documents which can still pop up because we know that they existed. I mean, one of that is the portrait of Andrea Cantelmo, this Italian general she surely depicted, and we know the portrait only because of a print made after it. And that's also interesting, Paulus Pontius, who also worked for Rubens. So she really worked with very established artists.
And for people that are maybe not experts in this field, can you briefly explain the process that an attribution involves? If somebody brings a painting to you tomorrow and says, this has been in my attic for 400 years, I think this might be a Michaelina, what do you actually do as a scholar working with conservators and all the tools at your disposal? What do you do to try and determine whether or not this is a painting by Michaelina?
Well, I usually have to pass, I mean, if I want to be sure, I need hours to pass to look at the painting, to study it very carefully. I will compare it with other paintings, signed paintings, to see if the brush stroke is similar. Of course, it would be interesting to know something about the provenance. You just have to do a research to see if there are some similarities to other paintings which are for sure hers. But your eye should be able to discover and to be sure.
Interesting.
So it is about connoisseurship.
Yeah. And one final question actually for Jen. Jen, this is the latest in a series of extraordinary women artists that you've been looking at over the last few years and writing about and talking to people about. How does Michaelina stack up in the in this new canon of art history that is sort of unfolding through this research? Where do you sort of place her in terms of other women artists who lived either, you know, before her or after?
I mean, she's really astonishing. And I think that a few of the things that we've touched upon earlier really mark her out as well. The fact that her father wasn't an artist and she became such a successful artist is really remarkable and very unusual. Although actually, funnily enough, Sophonisba Anguissola is similar in that way, in that, you know, she grew up in Cremona in a minor noble family, but her father wasn't an artist either, actually. And she achieved great acclaim throughout Europe. But her father was possibly one of the first sort of unofficial dealers in self-portraits. So maybe that pushed her in the right direction. But, you know, the fact also that Michaelina was doing big history paintings. I mean, as we all know, you know, because women were barred from the live studio, they really excelled in, say, flower painting because they had access to flowers. They excelled in self-portraits because they had themselves as a material always, you know. So for a woman to depict herself semi-naked in a major history painting is an incredibly radical gesture, you know, and something that should have been recognized, you know, much more prominently long ago. And, you know, I didn't know about her. It's, you know, there are still so many extraordinary women artists from art history that we still don't, you know, who aren't sort of common knowledge. Someone like Artemisia Gentileschi, who's roughly similar, you know, the great Italian artist. She achieved great acclaim in her lifetime. And really, it's only in recent years that she's been reassessed as well as a really great innovator. And yeah. I would say that, you know, going by what we've discussed now and looking at your Bacchanal, absolutely, she should be in the canon.
Gerlinde, one final question, very briefly. We know, for example, that Sophonisba was given a lot of respect by male artists at the time, and actually painted by them as well herself as a subject. What do we know of Michaelina's relationship with the sort of dominant male artists of the time? How much kudos, how much respect did they give her for her work and even her profession as a painter? Do we know anything about that?
Actually, I don't think so. So I feel that she really was ignored by. I don't have any official comment, and the different biographers of the 17th century really don't mention her. The first one who mentions Michaelina, saying that her first name was actually Magdalena, was an Italian one. So, and there are some French biographers already in the 17th century, but by the Flemish community, I have no comment of an artist talking about her, which might be one of the other reasons why she was so completely forgotten.
Yeah. Right. Well, she's not being ignored any longer, and I hope that there are a lot of artists that walk through the halls of museums and galleries now and stop and look at her work and take something from it, whether it's the same courage that she took in her own work or whether it's something technical. But either way, it's great to see her on the wall behind you. It's great to see her in the Rubens Gallery holding her own with, you know, someone who was pretty full of himself. And she's doing a great job there. So congratulations to you for hanging her. And this was a really fabulous talk, both of you. So on behalf of everyone who's listening, who's not able to thank you themselves, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And everybody who would like to can rewatch and re-listen to this talk through all the various channels. Jen and Gerlinde, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Jason, Jasper.
Right. Wish everybody a very good evening.
Yeah.